crosstalk,
Yeah.
and then
Because we can still.
You know, we do
Count
sometimes
every
actually
vote.
just put little photos of the people that were, you know, just because it would help.
Good afternoon, everyone.
we should be able to do it with that.
It is Monday, March 23rd. Welcome to the regular council meeting. We've adjusted with our current pandemic situation, and we have two councillors that are joining us by electronic means. Councillors Ross and Connick are both online. And I would just remind everybody to please speak up, because we're using different hardware than what we have in meetings past. We would like for everyone to be able to hear who's joining us online. So it is 5:01. I will call the meeting to order. First off, you've got the agenda before us. Councillor Hibbs?
I have no additions, so I would move the adoption of the agenda as presented.
Thank you. Chief Gowdy?
I would propose one amendment, and that is a reordering amendment to switch items 5.1 and 5.4.
So done. Councillor Connick, anything to add?
No, sir.
Councillor Ross?
No, sir.
And are you okay with the amended?
I'm okay with it, it's just a little unusual, next time be a little faster, but yeah.
So then we will read as amended. All those in favor? Thank you.
You'll have to get them to say yes or no, because you can't see them.
Yes.
Councillor Connick?
Councillor Ross says yes.
I'm sorry, Councillor Connick?
You're good.
Thank you. This ought to be fun. So thankfully this evening we have no hearings and no presentations, but we will move to item 5.4, and it was labeled here as Director Thompson. Obviously he is not here with us, but Craig from Parkland Regional Planning is here with us today, and we'll go through the Land Use Bylaw Amendment 400.29. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council. Please let me know if I drift off and you can't hear me. The material that's before you is in response to an applicant submitted a request to amend the land use bylaw. They are located in the University Commercial District up in the north end, and it's found that they're not a body and paint shop that's not listed as an allowable use in that particular district. So the applicant has submitted an application to amend the land use bylaw to allow their business to take out a development permit and remain in that area. In reviewing the material, we started looking at, not sure if that's, can't hear me or?
I'll just interrupt just one moment if I could. Councillors participating electronically, are you able to hear the presenter?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In reviewing initially, Your Worship, we checked the plans for that particular area, and it's fair to say that with the Municipal Development Plan and the North Area Structure Plan, the general intent is to transition this particular site from what used to be the commercial business park under the previous land use bylaw, and is currently reflected in the current outline plan. It had a mixture of industrial and commercial uses to commercial, residential, and institutional uses only, some limited capability of having industrial, but to basically transition the industrial out in favor of, especially given the residential plan to the immediate east and to the north in the Henner's, I forget the name, Henner's Landing area to the north of this particular site. In that respect, the request submitted by the applicant doesn't advance that desire to transition away from industrial uses. It's very much an industrial use that's proposed to be added. So the administration's view is the plans are going one way, the request goes another way. That being said, Your Worship, the recommendation is to give the applicant some time to manage that transition on their own, given that they've set up in that particular location, and to modify the request from a straight out permitted use to a permitted use, but with a very limited time frame, to give them 2 years to continue on their business and then find a suitable other location that already has auto body and paint shop as an allowable use in that particular district. So, Your Worship, that's what brings us to the recommendation at the very top of your RFD in terms of amending first reading. So taking the first reading bylaw that was prepared in response to the applicant's specific request, adding the time frame limitation as staff's recommendation, and then moving that forward for the public notification and public hearing process.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Connick, would you care to begin?
Sure, I'll just make the first motion then, that council amend bylaw 400.29. So 1A reads, adding auto body and paint shop in unit 11 times 0628084 up to May 1st, 2022 to the list of permitted uses in the University Commercial District.
Thank you. Councillor Ross, would you care to speak on this item?
I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional debate here? So, Leonard Teal, I appreciate the plan that you put forward here, or the report rather. Certainly some extenuating circumstances for businesses and whatnot. Now I think that I like the compromise of the time frame allowance, but I still don't necessarily see that this is an appropriate use in that particular area. So I certainly support it myself as well. So I think it's a good compromise. Don't know if we've got any other thoughts on the item, but Councillor Hoekstra.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. One comment I would make, there's a new high school proposed to be built just north of that. Would this not be an ideal opportunity for high school students to go over and have some job sharing and that sort of thing as a career proposal, like a future career for them? Like almost like industrial arts training kind of thing? Just a thought.
Councillor Hibbs.
So this is one of those situations where I find what we're doing here is counterintuitive. So we're amending a bylaw and then also giving it first reading, but I don't understand why we're doing that. Just by first reading of the bylaw would be that amendment to the bylaw. Is that not correct? Like, I'm confused as to why option 1 is there, so maybe we can have some clarification on that. This seems to me similar to a relatively recent motion that we had before. So I don't understand why this would be coming to us again like this.
Fair enough. Chief Gotti, would you prefer to answer that, or Leonard Teal?
I can answer that. Because of some of the emerging issues that we were dealing with last week, we didn't get to this specific item until near the end of the week, and we were unable to modify the actual bylaw in time to actually get it loaded onto council. So we were able to modify the council agenda, but the request for decision, but because of some of the remote working issues that we had, Director Teal, Executive Director Teal, was off-site when he was amending the RFD and wasn't able to make that amendment to the memo itself. So what you're seeing is a proposed amendment to the first reading that we're putting forward. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship. Just to add to that, one of the challenges when we deal with the applicant stated request is we have to at least put forward a bylaw that reflects the nature of the request. So the first half of the bylaw, as it was written, responds to what the applicant would like to have. Administration, in recommending to council how to process it, is adding the time frame. So that's why it's being changed in that respect. Otherwise, if we just jumped right to, if we had had a bit more time, as the CAO has indicated, to work with the applicant, we could have actually modified or worked with them to modify the request to see that they agreed with the actual wording of the bylaw, and then you wouldn't have had the first reading amendment. The other element about that is as we go out to the public, making sure that they understand that there is a possibility that could be for a time limit as opposed to longer permitted use. So this amendment does give us the ability to communicate that out as we go to the next step for public notice. And then the public hearing context, council will be able to hear people that are okay with if they choose to participate, with the time frame or not okay with the use period, and certainly you'll be able to hear directly from the applicant.
So just for clarity, the reason why there's two separate is because in the bylaw amendment as presented, it just adds the use to the bylaw, but does not include the time frame. But the additional amendment adds the time frame. So is that what we're saying?
Your worship, that is correct.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor.
So just so I understand this, as a point of clarification, could it not have been just we either have one motion or the other, as opposed to one and then amending the one after that? I'm just curious.
No, and that's fine. No, procedure is important. Chief Duddy?
I would agree.
So, yes, but also no, because what the applicant has requested was not a time-limited approval. So the applicant has come forward and made this application to change the land use bylaw. They paid a fee. They have said, I want this application to go forward to allow me to do my business at this location. So we're saying, yep, no problem, we'll bring that forward to council, which we have done. In this particular instance, we are saying, rather than pass just what they've applied for, we're recommending a time-limited time frame on it. Now, normally, excuse me, we would have been able to get a hold of the applicant and said, hey, this is what we're proposing, what do you think? And kind of got everything ready, so it would come as one package. That we were not able to do that last week. And so we are proposing a slight amendment to what the applicant has applied for. And that's why the amendment stays as you see.
So in order to keep in line with the wishes of the applicant and still follow the guidelines that we have under the MGA, this was the appropriate way to go. Confusing as it may appear to be. And
there may have been other ways to do it.
Messenger audio.
That's quite possible, but we're at this way.
My apologies.
It's problematic, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, sorry. Can you legally amend a bylaw if it hasn't passed its third reading?
But we're not amending a bylaw, we're amending.
Well, we're amending the amendment. First we're giving first reading to an amendment, and then we're proposing to amend the amendment. But doesn't that need to pass third reading first before we amend it?
No, but they would be done together. Still, in my opinion.
So you can amend a bylaw on any reading. Typically, you would not see an amendment on first reading. That is absolutely correct.
I understand what we're doing here. We're going to get into discussion about it.
It's ultimately the chair's decision, so.
I think more importantly than some of the fine points that we went over here is the implications of what this individual asked for here. And for the auto body and paint shop, are we okay with, in fact, the adding it to the list of permitted uses for that time period? I think is more critical than. Councillor Hibbs?
I mean, again, this is at first reading, so it's not really debatable, although I do want to ask this question. It sounds as though this business is already in the process of, has started business, or is at least in the process of setting up business, even though it was not even a permitted, was it a discretionary use then, or like, how did that happen, I guess, or am I misunderstanding?
So it was not a discretionary use, it is not a defined use in that area, so it would not be permitted or discretionary. They've gone ahead and started operating this business without the correct permits or business licenses in place.
Right.
So I will repeat the motion before us. The council amend bylaw 400.29 so that 1A reads, adding auto body and paint shop in Unit 11, Plan 0628084 up to May 1st, 2022 to the list of permitted uses in the UC University Commercial District. Any additional input? Councillor Ross?
No, thank you.
Councillor Connick?
No, I'm good.
Anyone else here? Well, I will call the question on. All those in favor? Those opposed? So noted, thank you. And Councillor Connick?
In favor?
Councillor Ross?
In favor.
Very good. Very good.
All due respect, is that unanimous, or was that?
My apologies, kind of difficult to see when you're not watching at home, isn't it?
Yeah,
That was not, there was one vote against.
thank you.
And do we have any additional motions?
We are hopeful, yes. I would say that the concern that I've heard is that really, number one, is more of a direction to modify the bylaw prior to first reading. Rather than saying amend bylaw 400.29, it was more of a modification of bylaw 400.29 as presented originally. So the first reading that's proposed under the second recommended motion is an amended version of the bylaw, which has the amendment that was passed in motion number one.
I will recommend the motion number 2, that council give first reading to bylaw 400.29 as amended.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Any additional, or any input on this motion? Seeing and hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Connick?
In favor?
Councillor Ross?
In favor.
Thank you, that was unanimous. Councillor Hoekstra?
I'll make the motion that council schedule a public hearing for bylaw 400.29 at 5:30 PM on Monday, April 27th, 2020.
Thank you. Any discussion around proposed motion number 3? Hearing and seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Councillor Connick?
In favor?
Councillor Ross?
In favor.
That passes unanimously, thank you.
Thank you, Director Teal.
Thank you. So,
So we switched to 5.1 to 5.4, so we do 5.2.
item 5.2, the bylaw 477 supplementary assessment bylaw. And were we having Manager Reyes, or are you going to handle that tonight?
Tonight's presentations.
Please proceed then.
So before council this evening is the second and third reading proposed for bylaw 477, the supplementary assessment bylaw. This is the bylaw that allows the city to levy a supplementary tax and collect those improvements that are completed between the taxation period of June 30th and December 31st through the application of a special levy. This is allowed by the MGA, sections 313 through 316, and not proceeding with the second and third reading would result in a significant loss to the city going into the 2020 tax operating, or 2020 operating budget. So we are proposing both second and third reading this evening, and are happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll move that council give second reading to bylaw 477, supplementary assessment.
Thank you. We are open for debate. If we had any input, Councillor Jacobson, you just wanted to do the same. Councillor Ross.
I'm in favor, thank you.
Councillor Connick.
Nothing yet.
Very good. I'm not seeing a lot of input here, so we've got before us the proposed second reading for bylaw 477. I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Connick.
In favor.
And Councillor Ross.
In favor, thank you.
Thank you, that was unanimous. Do we have any appetite for a third reading this evening? Councillor Hoekstra.
I move that council give third reading to bylaw 477, supplementary assessment.
Thank you. If there's any input. Seeing and hearing no indications thereof, I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Ross.
In favor?
Councillor Connick.
In favor.
Thank you. That was unanimous as well. Second and third reading. Thank you. And another financial item. Item 5.3, the bylaw 478 for the line of credit. Proposed second and third readings.
This gives the city of Lacombe the authorization to establish a line of credit of $3.5 million. In reality, this is the continuation of a long-standing line of credit that the city has had in place since 2006. A search of our records shows that this has never been accessed, although I think there is a chance this year, if you were to proceed with some of the community economic supports that have been proposed later on, that you may actually benefit from having this in place. We have done an assessment of our cash flow and are confident that with this $3.5 million, we would have more than enough to follow through on those proposals, and that no additional funds are requested this evening. The 3.5 will be sufficient. We are recommending second and third reading to this bylaw, and although the maximum interest rate is set at 6%, we would anticipate a much lower average rate across the time frame of the line of credit.
Thank you, Chief Gotti. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you. I move that council give second reading to bylaw 478, line of credit.
Thank you. So just as an item of clarity, I see that this is for 3 years. Is this a municipal time frame? Why does it not allow or align more with the 4-year terms? Or why not annual? What's the rationale behind that?
So section, I believe it's 256 of the MGA requires that any, 356, I'm sorry. I actually think it's still 256, I don't think that's correct. But one of those two sections of the MGA specifies that if you are getting a credit instrument that exceeds 3 years, you must publicly advertise the purpose and the duration and terms of that to the community. If it's less than that, it's considered short-term borrowing, and you can proceed with it through council action alone.
Very good. Councillor Jacobs? Yep, go ahead.
So yeah, you answered a bunch of my questions with your preamble there about liquidity requirements. So a couple of questions though regarding that. So is this, just out of curiosity, is this the maximum line of credit that is available to the city to this particular financial institution?
Chief Gowdy?
No, it is not. We would be able to access quite a bit more, both through this financial institution and in contemplation of your debt limit. You would be able to have quite a bit more.
Okay. And it wouldn't be, again, this is certainly going to be discussed later on, but it wouldn't be too onerous of an administrative deal to extend that if it should be required in the future.
Correct, although Senior Manager Reyes and I did have quite a discussion about it because tonight would be the night to modify it if we were, and we are very confident that the 3.5 million will carry us through. More than.
Because that, again, not just my point is tonight would be the night to do it, but if you're, all the experts that be are completely convinced that this is sufficient, then my questions are taken care of.
Thank you, Councillor Jacobson. So, once again, if in fact, if for some unforeseen reason it wasn't necessary, then we would have to put it to the public and advertise as according to the MGA and meet those requirements when it exceeds the 3.5 million.
There's actually I wouldn't recommend this. I think we would go through a public advertising period, but you can do multiple short-term borrowing exercises as a municipality to avoid that rule. So, no, you could go beyond that, actually.
And also, just for clarity, the $3.5 million, even if it were in fact accessed, still falls within our 75% self-imposed debt limit, correct?
Yes, you would be well below the 75% self-imposed debt limit, as well as your self-imposed debt servicing limit, which you've imposed on yourself as well, which is 75% of the MGA limit.
Very good.
And it is section 256, not 356.
I wish my memory was more accurate than what I've written down too. Any additional input? So with respect to bylaw 477, the second reading as outlined.
478.
I'm sorry, 478. So the reading goes. I will call the question then. All those in favor? Councillor Connick.
In favor.
Councillor Ross.
In favor.
Thank you. That was unanimous. Once again, do we have any appetite for a third reading? Councillor Hibbs.
I will move that council give third reading to bylaw 478, line of credit.
Thank you for that. Certainly open for any additional debate, and I will ask Councillor Connick, do you have anything to say?
No, sir.
And Councillor Ross, would you have anything you'd like to bring up?
No, thank you. Good discussion.
Thank you. And here in the room? All good. I will call the question then. All those in favor of third reading? Councillor Ross?
In favor, thank you.
Councillor Connick?
In favor.
Thank you. That was unanimous. And so we will.
Yes.
Be prepared for the first one then?
Yes.
Okay. So we will go back up to the first item, or it's listed as our first item, 5.1, the COVID-19 update. And I will turn the floor over to Chief Gowdy.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as I'm sure council is aware, there's a pandemic occurring worldwide. Well, the nature of a pandemic is that it is global. And certainly the province of Alberta has been affected and continues to be affected. As of today, and actually Director Piché is going to join us here for a brief overview. What I'm going to be doing tonight is having Director Piché give a brief state of the situation here in Alberta in terms of number of cases and any developing information since this memo was put together? Sure.
Sorry.
And then I will be going over some of the steps that the city has taken and has in place, as well as some proposed community economic supports to try and limit the impact to Macomb businesses and thus residents. So Dan, could you just give us an update on the Alberta situation since this memo was released on Friday?
For sure. So to date, there are 301 cases in Alberta. There are 17 in the central zone. Of those 17, 5 of them are in Red Deer East, 4 of them are in Red Deer Southwest, 1 of them is in Red Deer County, 1 in Innisfail area, 1 in the Olds area, Camrose is at 1, Wetaskiwin is 1, Vegreville is 1, and Vermilion is 2 for the 17. There are no confirmed cases at all in Lacombe at this present time. To date, Canada has 2,091 cases with 19 deaths. Worldwide, we have 375,458 cases to date as of about 4:45 today. So, and over 16,000 deaths. Over 100,000 though has recovered. And the top 3 countries that have confirmed cases are China, Italy, and the US.
Thank you. So there is a bit of background in your council package as well, and I'm sure you've done reading on your own as well to know about the situation. Tried to distill some of the information that we could find and from verifiable sources, and that's where you're seeing our proposed mortality rate, judging by a survey of the available literature, is around 1.5%. So starting, excuse me, in mid-February, the city of Lacombe began monitoring the provincial operations center quite closely, their messaging, to make sure that we were as up to speed as we could. And of course, they had, the province had initiated a level 1 response as of January 1st, shortly after the report of a pneumonia outbreak in Wuhan, China, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Starting in March, things began to become a lot more relevant locally. And on March 10th, staff participated in a province-wide conference call with the Provincial Operations Center to really look at how this was going to be responded to at the local level. March 11th, we began working on business continuity planning specific to a pandemic event such as we're experiencing. And starting on the 12th, began following the practice of restricting gatherings. We did close the Lacombe Memorial Center to certain gatherings on the 12th and 13th. And then on the 15th, when there was an elevation by the province, we made the decision to close all of our public facilities other than the City Hall and the police station to the public. March 16th, just trying to get the exact dates here. So March 17th, there was a motion by the province under the Public Health Act to a state of emergency. And the city had already been meeting actually since the 15th with our Emergency Coordination Center. So that is a multi-agency task team that we've organized around this issue, involving our FCSS, police, Alberta Health Services, and of course, our internal services as well. So we have been unfortunately shut down for all of last week, and that continues this week and actually for the foreseeable future. We've taken a look at business continuity planning in all of our administrative divisions, and critical functions have been cataloged and prioritized. So we have some general mitigative strategies that have been implemented across the organization that we're hoping are going to be supportive of the provincial objective to limit the impact of this pandemic to Albertans, and they're listed within your request for decision. I want to stress that the risk for service interruption of municipal services generally is quite low, and critical functions is very, very low. And the main reason there, at the time of me writing this, actually was a 14-day isolation. Of course, you're right, it's now down to 10 days. And so the chance of having a mass workforce level quarantine issue that prevents critical functions from occurring simultaneously is very low. And even if we were to have that, the chance that all of those workers would be debilitated by the illness is extremely low. Very few cases develop into critical cases, and certainly not typically within the demographics of the workforce that we currently have here in the city of Macomb. So we are not anticipating service level disruption. However, of course, there are certain functions within the municipality that require additional contemplation. And so we have created detailed contingency plans and mitigation strategies for the following critical functions, and I'll just go through them here. In operations, of course, as citizens would expect, city water quality testing, pump house monitoring, and daily inspections, as well as a similar level of service for our sewer system in terms of both the municipal facilities as well as the regional facilities, is one of our #1 functions, and we have mitigation strategies in place. Emergency sewer flushing is an item that has to be done in a timely fashion, and we have mitigation strategies in place. Major water leak responses and snow clearing of level 1 roads. Also, catch basin thawing. Of course, at a time like this where we're seeing potential for overland flooding is something that we have strategies in place. Been working closely with our emergency services. So the Lacombe Police Service has contingency plans in place for dispatch, guarding, patrol, and response. And the Lacombe Fire Service has critical function planning in place for response. Community services, we have looked at our facility maintenance in arenas and pools, which of course have mechanical equipment that must stay running and serviced during this period, whether the facility is open or not. We also have our communications, of course, to make sure we're able to communicate to the public in a timely and accurate fashion, and sidewalk clearing of facilities. Financially, we've identified mitigation strategies for payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and the assessment and collection of property taxation. And in terms of our corporate services, we have mitigation strategies in place for our network administration, email server, phone server, remote workstation setup, technical support, and the critical functions of our website maintenance. I will now move on to our proposed community economic supports. Of course, this is one of the... Sorry, Chair, did you...
Well, I was going to say, interrupt you there before you take on. I think it's important for the public to understand and appreciate the people that are behind the considerable efforts that the city's put forward to ensure their safety, or ongoing safety, and in addition to the directorship, Director Pichet is also our planning and logistics chief, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank you publicly, as I've done so personally, for your extra efforts. I know you've been putting in an awful lot of extra time and effort, and I can tell you that on behalf of council, we certainly appreciate it, and certainly does our community, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, Director Pichet and I had planned phone calls both Saturday and Sunday, and I missed them both and had to call her back within 15 minutes, so thank you for your patience, Diane.
No worries.
And before we go on, considering there was a fair bit of information there given, we will have a time to answer any questions rather than having this go by the wayside. I know it's an important subject for everyone. Councillor Hibbs?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that we are maybe able to look at this as sort of two separate things, even though they're on the same memo, because they are actually quite different. So I just have a couple of comments and I guess questions on this part of the memo. Yeah, I would definitely echo the idea that this is a continually changing situation, and so that it is really important, and this is especially for people that are maybe tuning in online or will watch this later, is that they really do need to stay on top of the constant changes that the province are updating with us on a daily basis, because it is changing all the time, and people need to understand what's happening. Information is what saves you from fear, and so that's really important for people to continue to stay on top of that and not be afraid, but be informed so that they're making really good decisions. Some significant changes happened to testing protocol today, so we were talking about how many cases are in the province. That isn't necessarily going to be reflective of the actual numbers going forward because of the way that they're changing. They're not testing everybody like they have been. So you're going to run into more and more cases where people have it and we won't know. So again, it goes back to that idea where people need to be informed on how they can protect themselves from this. It doesn't mean that they can't live a life, it just means that they have to take the measures that are responsible so that they're not spreading it to others and then they're not getting it themselves. So again, just stay on top of the things that the government is putting out and be very wary of some of the stuff that you see on social media and things like that. So again, assume it's here, even if you don't have a confirmed case. That is going to protect you, your family, your friends, your neighbors, people you don't know about, but it's going to affect somebody. So these are measures that are within your hands that you can make a difference. I guess another thing that I'd like to ask is, we talked about it a little bit, but not really, is staff changes. Like, what impact is this having on staffing? Are people going to, are we going to see temporary layoffs? Like, what does that look like? Because people are asking me and I don't have the answer for that, and I think that's important information.
Yeah, so certainly we are going to be looking at temporary layoffs for those staff that aren't able to perform their functions either remotely or that the function has been disrupted. So for example, we have made notification to a number of our recreational programmers that operate out of our facilities. Obviously with those classes not going on and the facilities being closed to the public, we unfortunately are in a position where we're going to have to lay off a number of staff. And depending on the length and magnitude of the shutdown, that could extend further than an initial round, which we are working on right now.
Was that everything, Councillor?
I guess the only thing that I would just bring up as a last item is changes to council meetings. Now I realize, of course, we're going to be talking about potentially cancelling a committee meeting, but of course we do have regular meetings, and this is important work that we're doing. We're not just gathering because we enjoy each other's company, although I do. But I think that maybe we should be, if we're not already, considering transitioning what this looks like, because I think that is probably responsible if we're going to be, telling other people that we should be limiting our face-to-face time. We should probably be practicing that. So I don't think we need to decide that at this meeting, but I just put that out there that we should be modeling what we're asking for, I guess. So.
No, that's a fair comment, and you can be rest assured that administration and myself have been discussing that very subject, and I think at this particular point in time it's important for the public to understand that we are conducting ourselves appropriately as to the provincial guidelines that's set forward. I think that's very important to understand. Partially for the reason you suggested is there's a tremendous amount of information available, not all of which is trustworthy. So I want to reassure all of the viewers out there that we are conducting city operations well within the guidelines that set out, and on more instances than not exceeding the requirements. Anyone else have any questions on Chief Gaudi's report thus far?
If I may.
Councillor Ross, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Once again, I want to echo all of the efforts from all the administration. Can't thank one enough for an excellent job. A positive, the extra signage throughout the city. There's some comments were that by email, thanking the administration for that extra effort. Just one question for information. You recognize some communities declaring state of emergency specifically and not with home. Just for information, some people have asked why have other communities and not with home. And I guess moving forward, I guess what I'm asking is, with the state of emergency, does that give you extra financial support from the provincial federal government? It's just a question because it's just for clarity to maybe as to why some communities have and others have not.
That's a very fair question, Councillor Ross. Thank you for that. I don't think that at this time it would be appropriate for us to comment on why other communities have done what they have chosen to do, but I think that our Chief Administrative Officer would be happy to enlighten everyone as to the path that we have chosen.
Sure, so the Alberta Emergency Management Act and regulations, supporting regulations, define the state of local emergency declaration. It's something that the council would, by resolution, declare a state of local emergency. It does give you some additional authorities as defined in those, the Emergency Management Act. So primarily, I would say the ones that would interest a municipality in a situation like this would be the ability to enforce certain limitations on public gatherings, take control or temporary control of various resources, whether that be equipment, facilities, or even labor, in support of their objectives, and certainly to control any price gouging or price fixing that was going on in the community or that was feared to be going on in the community. Those would be the three primary reasons that you might look at a state of local emergency at a municipality. We have not chosen to enact a state of local emergency or recommend the enacting, I should say, of a state of local emergency to council at this time for a few reasons. The first is you will get media attention when you declare a state of local emergency. And our feeling and our belief is that when you get that media attention, you should have something important to say as to why, what has changed that would necessitate a state of local emergency at that time. And with no active cases within the community, we have not seen anything that would support that. Further, the state of local emergency is only active for 7 days upon being called, and then it needs to be extended via resolution of council. So we would see that as almost certainly requiring an additional meeting of council 1 week from now to extend the state of local emergency. And to what end? At this point, we've actually seen very responsible behavior by our local business community, our residents, and haven't seen the need or the benefit of declaring the state of local emergency for fear that it really does heighten the situation at an administrative level without actually providing any needed powers. And it takes away that option if there is an actual escalation of the situation within our community to draw attention to that publicly by declaring the state of local emergency. So sort of once you've declared that, where do you go if things do escalate? There's no additional level of drawing attention to it. So at this stage, we are not recommending the implementation of a state of local emergency. Of course, that is a council decision, and if it's something that council wants to move ahead with, we are certainly prepared to work with you on that.
Thank you, Chief Gowdy. So this is certainly something that is at our discretion to do, and when the situation becomes necessary that we do choose to invoke it, it's certainly at our disposal. Councillor Connick, did you have any comments?
Just a few. Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I just did want to let everyone know that the Lacombe Police Commission did, we had a meeting last week, Thursday, and we did, of course, talk at length about COVID-19 and emergency preparedness. Rest assured, the mandate, of course, the Lacombe Police Service hasn't changed. It's always been public safety, and will continue going forward, naturally. As everybody's alluded to, there has been some, for example, the chief is undertaking to make sure there's some cross-training at the dispatch position, so if the dispatcher goes down, we are now training constables, so they can step into that role if need be. They've changed patrol patterns a little bit, in that with so many businesses being shuttered and closed, they're finding that they have to be a little more vigilant. You know, they are stumbling across, going into back alleys and seeing cars speed away kind of thing, so they're paying special attention to that. And so, yeah, rest assured that the Lacombe Police Service is taking everything into consideration and doing its part to be ready. And the officers do have to be a little more. I know there's been a couple of cases in out east in Toronto, I think, where people are being arrested and they're claiming to have COVID-19. So, I mean, it's heightened awareness amongst the service as well, and even though for the fire service, I know there was a post I seen on Facebook about someone at the fire service saying, if you do call 911, let us know if there's, expect COVID-19 in your household, that kind of thing. So anyway, they are naturally on top of it, and yeah, I too would echo the comments made earlier. I think I appreciate administration's efforts, the police service, fire service, and everybody in their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Connick. For anybody watching that doesn't know that Councillor Connick is Council's representative on the Lacombe Police Commission, and we appreciate you reminding us of those facts, so thank you. Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just responding to a request from yourself last week regarding the possibility of councillors taking some lead roles in the community as far as generating some response from different organizations to ensure that citizens are okay within the community. I talked to Councillor Hoekstra about that, and we'd be willing to take that on. And I think that's probably a couple of weeks away yet, but we'd be willing to work with church groups and SCSS and so on to organize that to ensure that all of the community, the shut-ins, especially the ones that maybe don't have family close by, those people will know that and just ensure that they're safe and getting their needs taken care of. So both Councillor Hoekstra and myself would be willing to represent council on that board or committee if we set one up.
Very good. That item is certainly still under consideration, and I appreciate you both stepping forward to consider being involved in that. I think that for the time being, we will remain in contact with our planning and logistics chief, Pichet, in that regard, and perhaps there'll be some opportunity to become more involved in the near future. So thank you both. Anyone else? You can continue with your report, please, Chief Gowdy.
So moving on to part 2 of the report, and Councillor Hibbs is right, there really is 2 sections to this report. The second is the community economic supports, and I apologize because this is the item that necessitated a late release of the agenda because we were working on this right up until the end of the week last week, and I see actually that I have a missing piece of information which I'll highlight here for you. So over the last week, especially in the latter part of the week, we began developing strategies to mitigate the economic impact to residents and businesses. Most of these items will primarily impact the cash flow of businesses as well as the city of Lacombe, although there are some operational costs as well, which I'll go through here. Largely though, this is, you're looking at a closed system in some ways. So later on I'll highlight that these costs, all 4 of these total about $385,000 of lost revenue for the city. Of course, that is revenue that is left, or money that's left in the pockets of local businesses and residents. So is it really lost money for the city? Well, only in a way, but of course that $384,000, we only have one way to make it up, and it's from those same residents too. So it kind of circles around itself. What it really comes down to though is that this is a year where I would expect most of our community would be happy to see the city looking at lower contributions to reserves, for example, and buffering the acute suffering that is going on with the community right now. And ultimately that will mean that it has to be recouped from those same individuals over time, but the city has the carrying capacity and the financial gravity to be able to absorb some of those costs now and buffer some of the impact that residents and businesses are feeling today. So that's why we've proposed these. It's not that this is free money or that this is some magic pill, but it does pivot the community organization to acknowledge that there's some shortfalls within our community right now that we may be able to help with. So the peak cumulative cash flow impact to the city's position as compared to our budgeted and estimated cash flow cycle would occur on July 1st based on a number of assumptions of the uptake of the various proposals that we put forward, and they are just assumptions at this point. We can estimate that peak cash flow deficit. I have $ABC there, and of course, that has been calculated. It's $8.3 million, and so I apologize that I missed that one placeholder in the memo. Although that information does appear on the next page, so it's not that it wasn't there. The first item is something that you've probably seen at a number of communities in Alberta, and actually raised kind of an interesting division of authorities question for us, because I see that many communities are making these decisions with what appears to me to be a speed at which they can only be doing them administratively and not passing them by council. I'm not actually sure how they can do that, because when we look at the impact, the financial impact is large enough that I don't actually think that's an administrative function. So they are on the side of safety. We've brought it to council for your consideration. So the first one is the utility payment deferral. There we have proposed a grace period of 3 months where utility payments could be deferred, after which residents would have 6 months to repay the deferred amounts. Logistically, because of the way our system works with VATM, this ultimately would manifest itself as 9 months of penalties being forgiven or waived, sort of a moratorium on penalties for 9 months. Because of course, if someone deferred for 3 months and then took the full 6 months to pay that deferred amount, it would be 9 months until they've repaid it. Also, I would say one unintended consequence is that penalties would also be held on those accounts which are currently in arrears. And many of those are in arrears because of nothing to do with the current pandemic. They're in arrears because they haven't paid the bill for a long time. Now, there may be very compassion-inducing reasons as to why they haven't been able to pay the bill in the past as well, so it may not be the worst thing that they are being given a moratorium on penalties, but I want you to know that that would happen. If we were to suspend penalties for those new amounts, it also suspends penalties on outstanding amounts. Economic support proposal number 2 is the deferral of the tax installment payment plan system payments for 3 months. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Given there's 4 of these, I think it might be confusing to not discuss them one at a time. Does anyone have anything that they would like to add? Councillor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Marcucci. I guess I just questioned that there couldn't be a manual override to somehow not have that first benefit applied to everybody. I don't know. Obviously not. You're saying you can't. But yeah, I questioned what fellow councillors' feeling was about that everybody benefited from that. Even though realistically, if they weren't paying before, they're probably not going to pay now either. But yeah, isn't there a manual override? Or?
So there is a manual override. It has to be done every month. So there's about 5,000 accounts, and to do it over 9 months is about 50,000 manual entries. It's not that we aren't able to do that. It's just that practically speaking, we would have to probably have a casual person on specifically undertaking that practice. It can be done. We just haven't calculated the cost of what that would look like at this time.
Councillor Gullickson?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Wouldn't it be possible to manually override the ones that are in arrears only? That would be like 40 or 50 accounts approximately, right?
I would have to look. When we discussed this with our utility payment staff, it was made very clear that our preference would be not to apply this. And the message we received back uniformly was that would be very, very difficult. I can't pretend to know the system well enough to say what exactly it would take. I'm sure it can be done.
But the reality of this is that we're only looking at, say, 40 accounts approximately that are overdue right now.
Nope, so I would say you're probably close to 1,000 accounts that are overdue right now.
For 1 month though, but not for 3 months. Again, I'm just trying to get it so it's not a huge amount of money that we're looking at. I'm trying to get that point across. That is outstanding right now for late payment penalties.
Correct.
Because they still have to pay the bill.
Yes, yes.
It's only the penalty, which is what, 5% of the total
No, I believe it is 1.5% per month.
per month. So about 5% over the 3 months, will approximately, of the total amount that they would owe if it goes back 3 months.
Yes.
Approximately.
Yes, I believe that would be.
Yeah, of that amount. I mean, it's not a huge amount of money, so we don't want to necessarily spend a whole bunch of money to save that, right?
Right. I think you're right, it would be about the 4.5% on only those accounts that are in serious arrears, which is probably less than 100.
Okay.
Councillor Jacobson.
So just for clarification, you're only talking about these accounts that are in arrears are only, they're not gonna have their current interest accrued date drop off the account. It's just the interest during the balance of the period of time they're asking for deferment is gonna be not
Correct.
covered.
But it's going to be the previous 3 months though, right? Because they owe that, is what you indicated.
So, if I may.
Sure.
So if I was on the arrears list right now and I owe $1,000, and there has been, let's say, $100 of penalties already applied to my account, those $100 would remain owing, the $1,000 would remain owing, but whereas normally I would accrue another $15 per month over the next 3 months, that would be withheld. So at the end of the 3 months, I would owe $1,000 plus the original penalty plus whatever I had done.
Okay, so the penalties aren't being waived.
Correct, they would just be held also during
So it
those.
is really a small one.
Councillor Jacobson.
So with that being the case and the clarification you made, I mean, I really don't see how in these extraordinary times, somebody whose account is in arrears is any less financially needy than somebody whose isn't, and if they want to take advantage of that, so be it, right? So.
And on that same note, this is not to suggest that everyone will choose to take advantage of that. It just gives them an option, especially for people that genuinely need it. It's available. Councillor Hibbs.
Just for clarification, so this isn't something that people would request, as opposed to some of the other proposals here. This is that would be a request. This one would just be across the board. If you decide you want to pay your utility bill as you have been, then you just continue to do that. But other people can decide, not to and not be penalized for it. So just for that clarification, is that correct? So it's applied across the board. It's just whether you decide to act on it.
Yes, that's correct. So the majority of the other proposals require some level of self-selection and identification to say, I'd like to participate.
Yeah.
This one, you're absolutely correct, it would just happen. Now, we have estimated a cost because normally we get penalties just month to month. We get about $5,000 worth of penalty payments. And so those would be entirely withheld for the full 9 months. Even from those who maybe otherwise would normally pay the payments and are able to, they'd still be withheld.
So I don't want anybody watching at home to suggest that their utility bills are going to magically disappear for 3 months.
No.
This just gives you the option to defer paying them after that period for the further 6 month time period. So it's a substantial difference.
Now there is
Perhaps some,
Councillor Hoekstra just had one question, I believe, before we move on.
But really what's being deferred here is the penalty payment, not the actual charge for the utility. Am I, just to clarify?
Well,
From what you were,
that's what would generate,
the penalty.
the penalty is not paying the bill in the first place.
Right,
So it's kind of all the same.
okay.
But for those individuals that chose to pay their utility bill and keep it just, because they don't want to face consequences down the road of having a larger than normal bill because they're making up for time gone by, that option is on the table for them as well. It just gives an option for other folks that would prefer to not pay it at that time.
I
For
appreciate the
those.
clarification though, because I think some people will read this and think,
Exactly.
it's all good, and it's not, so, okay.
Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I guess maybe just a suggestion is maybe with less administration, just encourage people, for example, you still pay, you have 3 months deferral, but if you have 6 months to pay it, is divide your 3 months into the 6 available to pay and add that much on extra. It's just, so there's less administration force the city administration to go over the massive number of accounts. I don't know, I'm just trying to find something simple for administration, I guess.
Yeah, so we did look at whether that would be a system where we would automatically increase the remaining 6 months by 50% to cover those first 3 months. Ultimately, then you're into this thing where you have to get an indication from each one of the account holders of whether or not they want to participate. And so that's why when we looked at it, the simplest way to do it is to just offer it to everyone at their discretion by withholding the penalty payments for the full 9 months. And that really does allow anyone who wants to participate can do that. And quite frankly, even though we'll advertise it as hold it for 3 months, you could actually hold your payments for 8 months and 25 days if you were so inclined, and pay them all at the last minute and incur no penalties. We're hoping that people don't put themselves in that position, but that option will be there for people.
Councillor Connick, did you have anything?
No, I was just further pondering Peter Carter's last comment. So you could have somebody potentially not paying for 8 months and then not paying at all. And then we've got this huge tax, this whole, like this huge amount outstanding, and we end up, they've been, what's the word, we're not defaulting on their utility payments, so they just don't pay at all, we shut them off, and that's it, that's done. Correct? Like you could go to a more significant shortfall than 45,000 you're suggesting, no? Or
Yes, so yes and no, I guess. Maybe I should correct my earlier statement. You could go the 8.5 months, but after 3 months of non-payment, we would be still pursuing collections activity. So you would go the 3 months with no payment, then you'd go another 2 months and we would start actively contacting you and saying, hey, we need a payment plan. We need to have something in place to make sure that your utilities can continue. So we would not be withholding collection action for the full 9 months unless the situation changes and council gives us other direction. So let me just correct that, I apologize.
okay, no, that makes more, that helps. Thank you. That's a bit of clarification. Good, thank you.
Anyone else before we move on? Item, Councillor Hoekstra?
So my other comment was, and this applies to number 2 as well, I guess, is the 3-month period. Like, we're all hearing that this is going to be much longer than 3 months, so, yeah, I guess I'm just curious if citizens come to us and say, is 3 months enough? And I know that we're creating, they do have to still pay for this, and they're creating, in essence, a debt to the city that they will have to pay, but in 3 months, is that going to be enough time?
Well, with the information we have now, I think this is a reasonable gesture, allowance.
So our fear was that if you go beyond that 3 months very far, you will start getting businesses that maybe shut down during that time, or people that move from property to property. And so you had asked earlier, would we expect to see a higher bad account write-off this year with these measures? Yes, I would expect to see double or triple the bad account write-offs that we've seen in the past, but we really can't predict what that will be until the end of the year. And regardless of the utility payment deferral, I think you will see significantly larger bad account write-offs this year.
Item number 2.
Okay, so for those citizens and residents that are on the tax installment payment plan system, we would offer a 3-month moratorium on payments, again, to be recovered over the following 6 months. So not moratorium, deferral is a better word. A deferral on payments to be recovered over the following 6 months. This would require those interested parties to call and self-select and say, I'm interested in holding my payments for 3 months. Similar to those that would be doing so perhaps for their mortgage or car payment or some of the other opportunities that are available right now for delaying some of these costs. There we're estimating a cash flow impact of just over $500,000, assuming a 25% uptake. And all of these cash flow impacts peak in July. That is when you will see your greatest impact, the estimated $8.3 million.
So is this item 3 months or nothing, or if some people chose to only need relief for 1 month, how's that going to work?
We would be willing to work with each interested party who wants to participate. The preference would be to keep it as standard as possible because this is, again, a manual exercise. And so anytime you're having a manual system interface with an automatic system, there's a chance for error. But if there is businesses or residents that, for a valid reason, would only want to do 1 or 2 months, I'm sure we would work with them to make that happen.
Okay, so it wasn't a situation where you're expecting either phone call or an email or something each month. This is a one-time agreement up to a maximum of 3 months.
That's right.
Thank you. Anyone else relating, or with regards to item number 2? Councillor Connick?
No, I'm good on that, thank you.
Councillor Ross?
No, that's great, thank you.
Anyone here in person? Item number 3 then, please.
It's a property tax deadline deferral. This is for those individuals and businesses that choose to pay their property taxes once per year and are not on the TIPS program. There we would propose moving the property tax deadline by 6 months from June 30th to December 31st. That lets the city still recognize the revenue in the correct year. It will result in the loss of 2 late property tax payment penalties, which are estimated at $143,000 in the 2020 operating budget. So that would be a loss of $143,000 of revenue, in addition to the previous items we've discussed. Here, we're assuming a much higher uptake of the proposed deferral strategy, simply because of the obvious benefit for anyone that's, I guess, holding large sums of cash like that, to hold it an additional 6 months. Most people are going to take advantage of that option. And so we are estimating a proposed cash flow deficit issue of $6.75 million. Now there is a slight amendment, I will say here. This assumed a full collection and remittance of the education requisition portion. There has been some announcements today of a partial deferral of that on small and medium businesses. And so until more details come out, I'm not sure what that looks like. I'm kind of anticipating that the province won't ask for that portion from us for a while. And so I'm guessing that it will actually be smaller than 6.75 million in terms of our cash flow impact.
And do we have an idea of approximately what percentage of our either residential or commercial or total choose to use the monthly payment plan, or in this case, the lump sum payment?
About 2/3 of our total payments are by the TIPS program, but 1/3 are lump sum payment. I don't have a split between commercial and residential, what those numbers look like. I only have the overall split.
I guess the reason that I asked that is that I struggle with this one in that the deferral to December 31st seems like I don't even know what the proper wording is, an overly generous way of rewarding a very few, in relative terms, very few of our taxpayers. I think that this is a fairly recent development and certainly severe, I get that, but for the next, we got 2 more months and to suggest that the situation will be different from the pay at 31st. This one is not, I'm just not totally sold on its outcomes. But Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yeah, I mean, even if we go to the 31st, I'm suspecting the same people that are late would be late anyway, and we get them next year. You know, the money would come eventually. They're not going to pay on time if it doesn't matter what it is. But I also feel it's an awful long time. Would we be able to do this in 2 phases if we did it now for deferred for a while, and then if things progress, that we would be able to adjust that, or is that a real problem?
Chief Gowdy?
So unfortunately, that is a real problem. The MGA requires you to post what your tax assessment deadlines are and your collection dates. And you would have to pass an entire new tax bylaw if you were to try and do it in 2 phases. We did talk about doing a 3-month deferral because of course that would align with our other proposals, which are for 3 months. The thought there was that from a business standpoint, it almost is a non-issue at that point, that the 3 months was too little, that deferring it from July, whatever it is, July 1st to September 1st, I think it was, that just wouldn't give businesses enough time to have recovered and be back in a position where they're able to make the payment. But it certainly would be more aligned with the other proposals to have it for 3 months.
I believe Councillor Hibbs was next.
My question was similar to Councillor Gullickson's, but I guess, what about the opportunity then? I am one of those lump sum payers, so we do exist. Would it be possible that you would have residents and businesses treated differently then? Because I too have a little bit of a problem with delaying it by 6 whole months. I get this is meant to give you some breathing room, but people that don't use the automated like monthly payment, the lump summers, we're just doing it on our own, right? We're accruing it, and I do find the 6 month to be excessive. I get we're trying to help residents, and I think that's very important, but I think that's maybe just being a bit, going too far, I guess. But I hear what you're saying about that might not be realistic for businesses. So I guess that would be my question is, can we treat those differently?
I am going to have to text our senior manager of finance, because I am not sure if you can set different dates for residential and non-residential tax classes. So if you will bear with me, he's standing by for just such an occasion, and I will just text him real quick.
Well, better to have the factual, no, that's great.
And then if I have just a quick follow-up as
Certainly.
well. I'm assuming, and as I apologize if I missed it, but this would just be across the board. This wouldn't be an optional thing that you could just go in and pay on whatever the usual date is. This would be now applied across the board, whatever it is we decide on.
Correct, although you still could come in and pay whenever you wanted. You would just be early.
You would actually have a tax bill in your hand though, like, so the bill would go out as regular, you would have it in hand. The only difference would be the deadline date would be now different as opposed to what it had been in the past, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And as odd as that may sound, I expect there will be lots of people who would prefer just to pay it as regular and have it be that dealt with.
That's what
So
I,
that's a
How much
possibility
interest
as
are you
well.
going to get in?
as a long person.
Yes. Councillor Hoekstra?
I had two comments, but just to go back to what CAO Gowdy was saying. So I guess the reason I brought up 3 months earlier is, again, will businesses be viable enough in 3 months to start doing their monthly installments? Because the reasoning behind this full payment is because the business might not be viable yet, so then that's why we're gonna give them till December 31st. So why are we doing it there but not for the people who pay monthly? I guess that would be my comment, but that's not what I was bringing up right now, but, because the reasoning that CAO Gowdy gave there made sense to me, so 3 months is a little too short in my opinion. But so comments from the business sector through the chamber was that a lot of businesses are tenants. And so these tax deferral benefits only benefit the landlord. And so they were curious. I know you can't tell a landlord what to do, but on the other hand, the province is very much trying to say to people in the province that landlords, please pass on these benefits to your tenants. So is there a way that the city is going to communicate to landlords the same kind of messaging? That, yeah, because that the experience with some businesses in our city is that the landlords would not. There's been kind of an acrimonious relationship there, and so they're not confident their landlord will pass this on, the benefit of it. So I'm just throwing that comment out there.
And fair enough question, Chief Gowdy.
So we talked about this, the same possibility, administratively, and certainly that is a concern, but we could not come up with a good strategy that would impose that condition, because of course then the municipality is acting as the police on this system, making sure that, just the verification would be impossible. So we would be following the same strategy as the province and making sure that all communications of these economic supports would have that disclaimer that, we are looking, whether it's for landlords and tenants at the business level or landlords and tenants at the residential level, we are expecting that these supports are being passed on to those that need them the most, which are the tenants, typically.
Councillor Ross, do you have anything?
No, that's great, thank you.
And Councillor Connick?
No, just, I would support the idea of just doing 3 months, as opposed to the 6 that's been echoed by a few others, including yourself. Maybe I'm the optimist in the room, or not in the room in this case, but I'd like to think, I'm hoping that maybe in 2 months we peaked out so that, by 4 or 5 months, things are getting back to normal. So I guess nobody knows, I suppose, but I think the 3 months would be better. I'm going to do 3 months for the tips, we should do 3 months here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So anyone else on number 3? We'll move on to business licenses.
The Lacombe business license credit that has been proposed is administration proposing to waive the fee or crediting those who have already paid, and I think that that's an important distinction because most have already paid. The deadline was earlier in the year. For 2020 resident business licenses. So resident meaning all businesses that have an address, a business address in the city of Lacombe, not home-based businesses or some limitation like that. But this would not apply to business licenses acquired by businesses not operating out of Lacombe. Total impact of this change would be a loss of revenue of $86,000, and there is an administrative component here where we would be actually physically generating checks for probably 1,000 businesses or so that have already paid. So there is some additional administrative burden there, although we've talked with our staff and we think it's about 18 hours, I think we had said, of total work. So it's minor in the bigger scheme of things. The combined financial impact, or sorry, I guess I will stop it there. The cost would be about $86,000 of lost revenue for the city of Lacombe.
Councillor Jacobson?
So I'm just wondering why we're waiving the fee here and everywhere else we defer fees.
Largely because of the values involved. It's $147 for a resident business, and we didn't see the value overall of deferring it and modifying the whole system for the $6,000. That's fine.
Councillor Hoekstra?
CAO Gowdy was referring to home-based businesses versus businesses with a Lacombe address. Can you clarify that again? Why wouldn't this apply to a home-based business? They do pay a business fee, license too, do they not?
So it would apply to them.
Oh.
I was just differentiating because I've said the 2020 resident business licenses.
Okay.
And resident business licenses includes all businesses within the city, including home-based businesses.
Okay, thank you.
So, Councillor Hibbs?
So this one is a little bit interesting. I'm wondering, partially because we've already collected some of this, but also like what the purpose of this, of business licensing is. I mean, it's, like, what do we use the dollars for that for? Like, what is the reason we collect the dollars for licensing?
That
is a whole other subject, but I'll let Chief Gowdy answer it if he chooses.
So that this has been a topic of interest for mine for a long time, and so it depends who you ask what the purpose is, and I will give both sides, I guess. Those that support the license would point to components of the business license funding things like the economic development manager position and advancing the concept of economic development within the city of Lacombe. I've also heard, I have done some research on this, even to other municipalities, and some will point to the collection of statistics related to that business. Some will point to ensuring that the business adheres to the land use bylaw regulations that the municipality has in place, and that they have things like provincial licensing that may be required up to date to apply for the business license. A lot of those reasons break down once you investigate the actual administrative operations of the municipality making these claims, because they often actually don't collect statistics and they don't do any sort of checks related to provincial licensing, for example, of restaurants. So I'm not a supporter of the business license mechanism whatsoever. However, when we've looked at proposing to do away with it, you can see the funds involved are significant. This is just under half of the total business license revenue in the municipality. The remainder, about 120 to 130,000, comes from out-of-town businesses, which is great from a revenue standpoint. It is very difficult administratively to actually enforce this, and so you end up in a situation where actually those that choose to flout the rules and not get the business license are at an advantage to those that do get the license, because if you're caught without a license, the punishment is essentially you need to go buy a license. So it is a system that we've looked at internally quite a bit. We always run into this issue of the collection of the fees. That to collect the additional $200,000, just recently looked at it, and it's like an 8% increase to the non-residential tax rate in Lacombe, because largely the majority of this business license revenue is coming from external businesses. And so to just internalize all those costs actually, to an extent, penalizes the local businesses at the benefit of outside businesses. The best strategy, in my mind, we're getting kind of off, but if you could have a uniform business license process for Central Alberta, where one fee was paid and that gave you the ability to operate in Blackfalds and Lacombe County, that actually solves the problem, except then you get back to this question of, well, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Because there's no point to a business license. It's my opinion. that there's very little point to it. In this particular instance, it is an actual loss of revenue that you have to deal with.
I have a follow-up to that.
Go ahead, Councillor Hibbs.
So I was just wondering the reason I asked that, and I would probably agree with the first half of that answer as to obviously the economic development officer and whatnot. And I'm thinking going forward that that is going to be a particularly important role in our community, because this is going to have an impact, even if it's relatively short term, it's going to have an impact on our business community. And I'm just wondering if I would potentially support continuing on with business licensing, but with the idea that those dollars are actually going for something that's going to benefit the business community. And again, that's probably a bigger conversation than what we're going to have tonight. But I guess that would be my, what sort of pops to mind with this, because I do know this is going to be a huge struggle, not only in this community, obviously, but you know, if we're going to collect these dollars, they should be, you know, intended for a purpose. And I think that there is a possibility that we could actually make an impact with those dollars collected in the benefit of those very businesses that we're collecting fees from. So I guess I would just sort of put that out there as a, maybe let's not cancel this one, but think about what the use is of those fees that are collected.
Certainly food for thought for later on. For the purposes this evening, though, would you have any comments, Councillor Ross?
No, just some good points made, I guess, as to probably information in the future as to what businesses are getting in return for that property tax, as what was alluded to. So, quite a discussion later.
And Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I would actually support waiving the business license this year. As Councillor Hoekstra alluded to earlier, you know, we hope that the tax deferral will get passed down to various businesses, that the landlords will do that. But in this particular instance, absolutely, the various businesses will benefit. It's not a lot of money, but it's still a little bit of money. So I would absolutely support this as a former business owner. Any money you can get back would be very beneficial, and I would support waiving the business licenses and refunding those that paid for this year.
Thank you. So, like Councillor Connick, I too am a business owner, and this one I just think is absolutely bizarre. We went through the efforts to collect a relatively small amount of money, and now we're going to write checks and incur a whole bunch of time and effort on behalf of administration to put back in the hands, for most cases, $147. This is the kind of government programming that gives government programming a really bad name, because it costs way too much to implement for very, very little gain. This one is bizarre at best, and I certainly do not support it in any way, shape, or form. Proposes waiving the fee. Waiving would be one thing, but to have went through the effort of collecting it and then double those costs and now send the checks back out is just bizarre to me. So, not a big fan of this one. We may want to consider, if it's actually waiving the fee, then waive it to next year, or do away with business license altogether if that's a consideration. But to go through this much work for extremely little gain is just not in anyone's best interest, I don't believe. Chief Gowdy?
Okay, so I had asked Senior Manager Reyes if he could give us some information on the ability to have two separate tax rate deadlines for the residential versus the non-residential tax classes within the municipality, and that is not allowed within the legislation. You must have the same due date for businesses and individuals. So that would not be an option to have two different deadlines. Okay, so
I guess just along those same lines, then, property tax is not a thing where you half is due at a certain date, and the that kind of thing. It's either the monthly or the lump sum payment. Just to make it okay. Very
Yes.
good.
Must all be paid by a certain date.
Councillor Jacobson?
Sure. So I echo most of your comments, Mayor, on number 4. I don't, the CAO is right, it is a tiny amount per business, and I don't really see this being a make or break item. And in fact, for the businesses that do own their own properties, and don't forget, landlords are businesses too, being able to give them the cash flow deferment actually to pay on December 31st, as opposed to 3 months afterward, is going to be a much more substantial benefit to their balance sheet as a whole, taken all together, than to give them a $147 rebate. So I'd speak to both those issues in light of Manager Reyes' clarification that I would support defer to the 31st, because those businesses that do own that could take advantage of that, and that would be much more beneficial than $147 or $300 or whatever it is they're going to receive back.
Thank you.
So the combined financial impact of the recommended strategies that we've gone through, keep in mind this is all 4 combined, and there is individual impacts associated which are listed in the memo. The combined cash flow deficit for the city of Macomb would peak July 1st and could be as high as $8.3 million. The lack of available cash will reduce the city's investment income for Q3 and Q4, and we've estimated that revenue reduction of $110,000 as $110,000, although I must admit that was difficult to estimate because of the current market conditions. If we saw significant recovery in Q3 and Q4, of course that lost revenue could be substantially higher because we would have participated in the recovery and we won't be able to. So the combined impact of the 4 strategies proposed would result in a one-time, and I want to stress that, a one-time total loss revenue of about $385,000 for the city of Macomb. We would propose funding these shortfalls through reduced contributions to infrastructure reserves in the 2020 operating budget. I guess I want to stress, I am someone who cares about the infrastructure of the city. That is a high concern for me, and would not be making reduced contribution recommendations lightly. I do so only in the context of the impact to our residents today from the current pandemic versus the importance of a long-term infrastructure strategy and how we might be able to mitigate the impacts over the coming 10 years or so. We would propose at the year end amended reserve contributions that would defray the impact to any one infrastructure class, so we would not just short the roads reserve or the water reserve. It would be kind of a uniform approach that we would look at, sort of spreading that over all of our reserves. We've listed some strategic objectives that you could consider these decisions through, although I don't think the strategic plan contemplates the situation we're in now, so it was only a mild lens to look through. We've got some information on the history of our public engagement and communication strategy that we've been working on, and when I say we, I would say largely Mr. Kumar, who's been doing great work for us. Thank you, Devin. And then beyond that, there's some background information that we've assembled in terms of Alberta's experience with the COVID thus far. So if I could suggest, maybe on those, the first part of the presentation was an accept for information recommendation. The second part of the presentation was some recommended proposed community economic supports, and you would probably want to get some direction on each one of those 4 that we put forward.
Very good. Thank you for that report. Councillor Hoekstra. Certainly, Councillor Ross, go ahead.
Thank you. So, just a question process here. Like CEO Gowdy just directed, are we going to vote on each of the 4 suggestions by administration? Like, as you said, the first part is taking this information from the last, and then the 4 recommendations, are we going to vote on them separately?
That is correct. The portion up to or prior to community economic support will be hopefully received as information, and then the other 4, in fact, will be voted on separately.
Thank you.
Councillor Hoekstra?
I just wanted to counter some of your comments about number 4, that the chamber has supported all 4 of these recommendations, and they do represent business members in our community, and it might be a small contribution to have their business license dollars returned, but it didn't come up in the discussion that they thought that was ludicrous. I don't think we're gonna pick it over, like what Councillor Jacobson said. For sure, 2 and 3 will have more genuine financial impact for businesses, but I think the overall message of support that's coming from the city to businesses is really, really important, so I would still support option number 4. So.
Thank you, and I don't want anybody to get railroaded into thinking this is strictly a business support. This is for our entire community, a lot of these implications, and certainly the cost for them will be borne by everyone, not just businesses, the ongoing costs down the road, rather. So thanks for your input. Councillor Jacobson.
So I had a question for the CAO. So when you identify that the cash flow deficit could be as high as 8.3 million, and obviously that assumes a maximum 25% uptake on some of these programs or 75% on some of them, have you considered, I mean, what is the probabilities that you're going to have more uptake in those programs? I mean, have you consulted anybody professionally to get those numbers, or is this just based on your broad sense of historic trends when there's incentives offered?
Yeah, I would say it is more based on estimates of the uptake, professional judgment. However, we did look at that very thing of, what if we're off? What if we've said 25%, but it's 100%? And so there, you're going to see a cash flow deficit on number 1 of about 3 million. On number 2, you're going to be around 2 million. And then number 3, you're at around 9 million. So we did look at that 100% uptake scenario, and we still would have the available cash flow to make that happen. Liquidity, I should say, to make that happen.
So that was taken into consideration with that line of credit amount then?
Yes, it
That's
was.
forms part of it, yes.
Although you would see where you would see it would be like a larger reduction in the revenue associated with investment.
Okay, thank you.
So, does anybody care to make a motion to receive the first portion of the report prior to community economic support for information?
I'll make that motion that we receive the first part of this report as information.
Thank you, Councillor Gullickson. Anybody care to speak to that motion specifically? Seeing and hearing none of the speaker, I will call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. And then we would move on to the...
In favor.
Thank you.
In favor.
You didn't get me trained yet. Appreciate that, gentlemen. So, I would expect we would just want to handle these in order, but the floor is open. Whoever would care to make a motion for the remainder of these items.
So I just go ahead and move utility payment deferral?
Councillor Hibbs? Sure.
I would so move as presented as in the memo.
As item number 1?
Yes.
Very good. Anybody choose to speak additionally on this item? Councillors Connick or Ross, do you care to speak on this item before we vote?
No, thank you.
No, sir, I'm good.
Okay, that includes everyone then. Pertaining to recommendation number 1, utility payment deferral, the motion before us, all those in favor? Councillor Connick?
In favor.
Councillor Ross?
In favor.
Thank you, that is passed unanimously. Councillor Hoekstra?
I make a motion that we accept the suggested deferral of tax installment payment plan system tips property tax payments for 3 months as presented.
Thank you. Anyone care to speak on that item? Seeing and hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of item number 2? Councillor Ross?
In favor.
Councillor Konik?
In favor.
That is unanimously in favor. It passes. Thank you. Councillor Jacobson?
I move to pass option 3, property tax deadline deferral for 6 months from June 30th to December 31st, 2020, as stated in the agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Hoekstra?
I think it should be September 30th. I think it should be a 3-month because we're expecting our monthly pay, the tips participants to have 3 months, so I think there should be 3 months as well.
Certainly the mover has the ability to amend if he so chooses. My expectation is you're curious in the scenario that if this was defeated, could it be restated with a different timeline? And my suggestion would be, yes, in fact, it can.
Yes.
Very good. For whatever that's worth, just so, because I expect that was your next question, no?
Well, I guess I wondered how we would defend this. Why is this 6 and the other one's 3? Because, well, anyhow, I don't know. Just why would we defend it? How would we defend it? Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Konik, anything?
I with Councillor Hoekstra, I think it should be uniform. I think it's supposed to be 3 months. Thank you.
Okay, thank
I
you.
support Councillor Hoekstra as well.
Very good. Chief Gotti?
So I wouldn't say we were lining up a defense of it, but our thoughts when we made the 6-month recommendation versus the 3 months is that the TIPS program already defrays some of the lump sum impact. And so you've already taken steps to spread out the impact over time. Whereas a full lump sum payment of your taxes, it can be for some businesses a fairly significant amount of capital that can actually be used elsewhere, whether that's to make payroll or to invest in another project. With that 6-month deferral, you actually have options with a large sum of money. The 3 months on the TIPS program, whether you go 3 months or 6 months, it's already a cash flow issue. It's not a capital, it's not a redeployment of capital type of issue. So that's why we had made the 6-month recommendation.
I just have one quick question, Mayor Creasy, on that.
Certainly. Councillor Konik, go ahead.
So those businesses that are paying lump sum now could, before the tax deadline, switch to a TIPS program? Because that's an option, correct?
That one's going to require a little bit more investigation. I believe that there's a time period when, in fact, you can engage that, but I believe that may have passed for the year, but we will check into that, and that's a very fair question, though. Go ahead, Councillor Jacobson.
I know the answer to that because I did it.
Wonderful.
So the TIPS is for the current tax year you're paying, right? The lump sum is for the previous tax year. So you can switch to TIPS at any time. You just have to bring in your amount owing for the previous year and bring yourself up to date for the current year. So, yeah, it would be to no one's advantage cash flow wise to switch from a lump sum to TIPS.
Yes.
And to speak to my own motion, I understand the fairness principle that you guys have put forward here. But again, the CEO is correct, and my motion is purely based on cash flow consideration for those businesses especially, and perhaps individuals, but especially those businesses who have decided to take advantage for their own cash flow purposes of doing lump sum payments. And, you know, with with liquidity being at a premium and, payables being, an issue, having that anywhere from extra $5,000 to maybe even $15,000 available, to provide that, for an additional 3 months is very, very beneficial, not just to those businesses, but then those businesses who rely on getting paid from those businesses as well too. And again, the TIPS program is just anywhere from $100 to $300 a month, again, deferred for 3 months and then push up from there. It's actually, I think, in this case, a very equitable arrangement. This is to no way denigrate those people on 3 months. This is really, again, just to provide, I think, a much more tangible cash flow benefit to those businesses and individuals. So I know that's not speaking to fairness, but that's speaking to the reason anyway. Yeah.
Councillor Hoekstra?
I guess my comment wasn't about fairness so much as just defending it. And I guess your comments just defended it.
Okay.
Defended, if that's the right word. It's like, what's our reasoning there?
Explained it.
Explain that. That makes sense to me. Those of us that go monthly, or those of us that go lump sum, what's the benefit? But that was good.
Anyone else? So the motion before us is to move the property tax deadline from June 30th to December 31st. Just an indication from the mover that we're okay, very good. That is the motion before us, and I think they always had their moment to speak. So I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Connick?
I guess Councillor Jacobson has convinced me. I'm in favor.
Councillor Ross?
I'm in favor as well. Good information.
Very good. So I don't want to misinterpret your vote. And I wasn't, it was kind of a half vote there, and I just wanted to
It's in favor.
in favor?
Yes.
Kind of.
Very good. So that item is, no, I was opposed actually. So you can mark one black sheep down. Very good. We'll move on to item number 4.
If I may, Mayor Creasy, I'd like to make that motion.
Certainly, Councillor Connick.
The rules administration proposed waiving the fee or crediting those that have already been paid for 2020 resident business licenses. And again, if I may, again, it's a small amount, and I know, I just think overall, I agree with Councilor Hoekstra that this has a better picture to it. So we're trying to do everything we can, even with little bit, to help the business community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I didn't word that quite correctly. I would move that administration waive the fee or credit those that have already paid the fee for 2020 resident business licenses. Not proposed, sorry. That's, I'm amending my previous motion. This is the motion I wanted to make.
Very good. We understand it now. Thank you, Councillor Connick. So for anybody that wasn't on board with that, Councillor Connick suggested that administration waive the fee or credit the business license fee for those who have already paid for the 2020 resident business licenses. Anybody have anything additional they'd like to add? I will call the question then. All those in favor? Councillor Connick?
In favor?
Councillor Ross?
Oh, Lordy, in favor.
And those opposed? That is defeated 4-3. For the record, then that was Gullickson, Creasy, Hibbs, and Jacobson. Got that? Very good. All right, well, that was a fairly lengthy item, but certainly an important one. I appreciate everybody's patience in dealing with it. I think that sends a pretty strong message to our community that we are in fact in this struggle together and doing what our part to support them where we can. I believe we're on to item number 5.5, April 6th committee meeting. Chief Gowdy?
We are proposing to cancel the April 6th committee meeting.
And I really appreciate the length of that report, as does the remainder of council, I expect. Would anybody care to comment on that report?
You might get up by 9 o'clock.
Anybody care to make a motion? Councillor Jacobson.
Aye.
Go ahead, Councillor Jacobson.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I move we cancel the April 6th committee meeting.
Very good. Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I sincerely respect all of the extra effort that's been done. I guess common question is asked, would have this been a committee meeting for the solid waste, or where are we at with that one? Just, that's a reoccurring question in the community, but in light of all of with the pandemic and all of the tremendous efforts in the administration, I understand why this would be canceled. So.
Very good. Chief Gowdy, there was a question there as to the intended subject matter for that particular date.
So that wasn't the date we had held, that was actually just a date we had tentatively scheduled in October. Just an update on the solid waste review, Director Thompson and I had planned to go through that on Thursday originally. Unfortunately, he is in self-isolation, and so we have pushed it off. It's been rescheduled to late next week, so we are still planning, hopefully to have something for you here within April on that topic.
Councillor Connick, anything?
No, sir.
Thank you. I see no one here trying to garner my attention, so I will ask the question then. We have a motion before us to cancel the April 6th committee meeting. All those in favor? Councillor Connick?
In favor.
Councillor
In favor.
Ross? Very good. That's unanimous. And then we'll move down to the last request for decision, item 5.7, the respectful workplace policy. And filling in for Manager Wilton is our CAO.
So we can certainly skip to 5.7. There is an item 5.6, which is the council committee appointment, but we can go to that after, it's no problem.
You know what, that was, as I was checking off my list here, I saw a committee and I crossed out the wrong line, so let's, why stray from the order now, let's do the council committee appointment.
Absolutely. So this is another appointment to the Affordable Housing Strategy Steering Committee. Originally, Mr. Freeman was included on the appointments that council reviewed and endorsed at your last meeting, which was also for this board. Unfortunately, we just couldn't get a hold of Mr. Freeman quite in time for the deadline, so out of an abundance of caution, we pulled it back. It's here for you today. He's happy to let his name stand again, and we'd be pleased to have him on the committee.
Councillor Hoekstra.
I move that council reappoint Bradley Freeman to the Affordable Housing Strategy Steering Committee with a term ending December 31st, 2021. And then I have a comment. Why only till December 2021?
Because that is the length of the position that he's filling that had come up for availability.
Oh, okay, thank you. Maybe it was in there, I should have read it.
No, that's a fair question. It's unusual, and because a lot of the appointments are staggered, this one happened to be a little unusual timely, so that's certainly a fair question. Anything, Councillor Connick?
Just one real quick, maybe a little off topic, but I know we were going to look at volunteer appointments and committees and all that. Just real quick, Patty, are you able to elaborate on when that discussion was brought forward?
Yes, Director Juke and I have completed a project charter for that review, and you will see it within the next 2 months. You will see a initiation of that review. I expect, given the process that we are looking at, I expect it will take some time to go through the actual review itself, but you'll see that starting here over the summer.
And that is certainly a related question, Councillor Connick, thanks for bringing that up, but I think regardless of how future decisions may impact those appointments, business has to continue on in the meantime, and that's the reason why, in fact, this one has come up.
Understood.
Okay, fair enough. So no one has any desire to consider this appointment at a later date? Very good. In that case, I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Connick?
In favor?
Councillor Ross?
In favor.
Thank you very much. That's passed unanimously. And if I read my own notes now, we can move on to item number 5.7, respectful workplace policy.
In 2019, occupational health and safety legislation was updated to include bullying, harassment, and bullying and harassment actually as issues that must be dealt with and mitigated by the employer through the occupational health and safety regulations. Following those updates, the City of Lacombe has updated its policy and administrative directives to adhere to the new legislation and ensure that our workplace is in line with those regulations. We have also created an administrative directive that provides some additional level of detail to those interpreting the policy itself.
Councillor Hoekstra?
Do you want a motion first, or do you want us to discuss it first?
Our policy states that debate begins after a motion, so I prefer you have a motion first.
Okay, I'm guessing we will approve it, so I'll just, but I have some, I want to have some change, whatever. I'll just make the motion that council approve the respectful workplace policy effective today, I guess, March 23rd, 2020.
Thank you. Did you have some additional comments?
Yes. So I have
Floor is yours.
I have identified a few typos, but then I also, do you want those first?
If you can send those, actually, the MGA allows the CAO to correct if there is typos, grammatical, spelling errors.
Okay.
You can make those after the fact, but
Sure.
if you want to bring them up.
Yep, that's fine. So I get it in the preamble, like the policy statement, that it talks about the city. But as the policy progressed through different statements, I'm looking at page 5. I think the first half of the page, it says, the city may first try to resolve the issue informally. And then thereafter, it will refer to the city has full discretion, the city to respond, the city. This is a policy that people will use when they're involved in a very personal situation, right? And I guess I just had problems with it saying the city. I wished, and correct me if I'm wrong whether this should all fall onto the CAO, but I felt like it had to be a person, like a position, rather than the city. Because if I was having an issue with, and then I had to appeal to the city, it just didn't seem fair to that person. Like, who am I supposed to go to if I got to appeal to the city? Does that make sense? Do you know where, I just didn't like when I was reading that, but.
Fair enough. I think that Chief Gowdy's got a perfect explanation for that.
So the nature of policies, unfortunately, there is some impersonal side. But we did include in here under the process that they may report the conduct to their manager, division director, volunteer coordinator, or human resources to seek assistance. Of course, if the formal complaint is against the city's CAO, we have actually a component here as well, that a complaint has been brought to the mayor. So that there is some positions identified specifically, but you're right, there is a number of references to the city in the policy as the overall employer, for sure.
May I continue?
Certainly.
Thank you. So I was referring to the code of conduct for council, and I didn't get that same feeling when I was reading that one. Yeah, I don't know if they are comparable policies. It talked about members of council, and it didn't at any point sort of make this body out there that you can't identify who's going to actually take responsibility for it. It always applied to council members and that kind of thing. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm asking that, is there going to be a human resources committee or something that for sure that this person says, I don't know who the city is in my situation, so who do I go to? And I get the whole supervisor thing, but I've also, I guess I've been privy to situations too that, you can't go to your supervisor. I mean, you can't actually even go to the supervisor's supervisor. And so I just found it was too impersonal considering the very personal nature of this policy. And I guess I shouldn't have maybe made the motion, because I just feel there should be some changes here to somehow personalize this more, or to create a body that this person can always go to that represents people in the organization that will look out for their rights, if that makes sense, or their, is any of that making sense? Maybe it's because I've had some personal experience.
No, absolutely, that doesn't, Councillor Hoekstra, by making the motion, does not suggest that you have to vote for it. So,
or we could table it or whatever.
Correct. So, but in saying that, I think it becomes rather cumbersome for the wording, because it does change from department to department and at various levels of management, or employees, or counselors, that kind of thing. I, as much as I appreciate the direction you're going with this, I'm not sure that the benefit will be there for the amount of work that it would take to look after every scenario, and until it becomes an issue that people do not know who to report to, I'm not necessarily sure that we're solving a problem that exists, but that's just my 2 cents worth. Chief Gowdy?
So I guess I would also add that what you're seeing here is the policy, and so of course council passes the bylaws and the policies. There is supporting administrative directives that go through the actual process, so who you're going to be complaining, who you're going to be submitting a concern to, and then what happens if you're satisfied or not satisfied with the response you get. Those are detailed in an administrative directive, which is approved administratively, and so it just doesn't appear here. But we do have some of those details of the actual process detailed in a separate document.
And so would it be fair to suggest that those directives put forth by administration would go to each employee and be perhaps different in who they report to, and at that level would be taken care of and made clear for each and every member of the organization?
Yes, although I would say there is still going to be a degree of personalness because of the nature of it applying across the organization. It is going to say, initially submit your complaint or concern to your direct supervisor. If you're not satisfied, go to the human resource director. If you're not satisfied, go to the CAO, and if you're not satisfied there, then of course, the council is the ultimate.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Sorry to belabor this, but for some reason it was my turn. I guess I still see this as a hierarchical thing, right? Like you kind of every time have to go up. And I was hoping that it would have more of a, that the staff or the people involved would feel like there was a peer kind of, a way that they could go, appeal to something that didn't represent power, if you will. And I guess I feel strongly that there is a place that people can go to that they're not needing to step out into an area that they're not comfortable being in because of power, if you will. And so so not only did I find it impersonal, I also just found that so I'm just looking at the top of page 6 here, and it says, in the event of an allegation under this policy, the city has the full discretion to take whatever temporary blah, blah, blah. And I just go, who is the city? And when I'm experiencing a pretty uncomfortable situation and my supervisor could be involved, I don't know. I guess I just think we need to support the people that work within this community or within this organization in a better way than this. So that would be my comments.
Does anyone need a motion?
I did.
Yes. Thank you.
Which,
She made the motion and.
well, I wanted to discuss it, but no,
And that council approved the respectful workplace policy effective March 23rd.
Thank you. Councillor Godson?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I mean, I agree with Councillor Hoekstra's thought process of having a peer group. That's what you're looking for, right? Do we have that within the city right now? Some place where if you're about to start a process, you can go talk to somebody, a peer group, and say, what do I do if they're not sure?
So definitely we do not.
Okay.
I guess I would say the concept of collegial reporting, I think would be very problematic at the city. To differentiate between hearsay and gossip versus an actual complaint would get difficult, and I think you'd have issues of confidentiality where staff members would be in a position of feeling obligated to report something to their supervisors on behalf of someone else. We have not looked at that, and I would say with council direction, of course we can, and that if that's your desire, we can implement a system like that. Right now, we have the investigative procedures are outlined as to who the complaint investigator will be in various circumstances, but it is always, as you identified, it is someone in a position of power. It is someone who is able to effect a change or respond to the allegation that's being made on behalf of the city, and the more serious the investigation, I guess the higher level of power that is generally going to be involved.
Councillor Hoekstra?
thank you, Mayor Creasy. I 100% respect the hesitance around collegial complaint, that are saying things. I guess I was leaning more, okay, we've got our human resources director, and then maybe, some staff, like that it's a committee, if that makes sense. And it's not just any old committee, it is appointed. And there would be terms so that you could go to that committee and you would trust that that committee could act on your behalf. It's just that I think that sometimes employees do not bring things to light, or people, I should just say, people do not bring anything to light because they have to act on their own behalf. And often in these circumstances, you don't have the capability. You might have the capability to share your situation, but to actually act on it takes a certain level of confidence and a certain level of knowledge, and I don't know, I just really believe in a human resources committee or something that you can appeal to that committee and then that committee will act on your behalf. But not in the way that, I understand your hesitance and your concern there, but I'm not trying to go there. I'm not gonna say it. Anyhow, that is just where my comments.
Councillor Connick, anything?
Sorry, it's mute myself there. No, sir.
No problem. Councillor Ross?
No, sir.
Anyone else? So just to jump back, our motion before us was to support, approve the respectful workplace policy effective March 23rd, 2020. I believe the way it was read.
So I have a question.
Councillor Jacobson, go ahead.
I have a question for the CAO. Does this policy in any way prohibit the city from enacting something to Councillors Hoekstra's concerns if administratively it deemed it would be in its best interest? Because I suppose while I completely concur with the sentiment behind your saying, I fear somewhat we're kind of delving more into operational issues here as opposed to policy, right? So I'm just curious if that policies, if operationally the experts decide that what I'm saying is this going to prohibit you from implementing what is best practices?
I would not say it would prevent that, but if it's council's direction to support a model that relies on a human resource committee type investigation, then I actually would say that should appear in the policy here, because you've got roles and responsibilities for directors, managers, supervisors, right, all of the different parties. And if there was the establishment of a human resources committee, I would say their roles and responsibilities would be identified in this policy. So I don't think it would preclude us from doing that, but if that's the way that council wishes us to move, I would say give us that direction. We can bring back a policy that includes an explicit reference to a human resources committee that would form a part of the complaint investigation team.
So that's not my sentiment. My sentiment is that I don't know anything about this and I'm going to leave it to professionals who do. And frankly, if I'm going to comment on it, I'm always frankly very leery of any human resource document, because I think you have to be very careful with that, because you can for the aspiration of employing the rights of the downtrodden, you can often go way too far and things can become very Maoist, I think. So even in a small place like this. So I was just curious about that. I didn't mean to get the vote off the rail, but I do broadly feel that this is veering into operational matters and not governance. So I was just curious on that point.
So I guess one thing I would point out is that I think the city does an admirable job of gleaning information from, or input from council, from employees, from this, and the employee satisfaction survey. I'm unaware that this was ever in any report that came up that this in fact was an issue, and I'm just, once again, I'm not questioning the motives that are involved here. I'm just suggesting that we're, once again, leaning a little bit into the operational end of things and drastically changing something here that has not been shown to be an issue thus far. So I'm just not sure what the purpose of it would be at this particular time. At some point in time it may become an issue and have to be dealt with. I'm just not sure that point is now. Hopefully it frankly never will be, but Councillor Hibbs, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, like, there is informal process and formal process, and that does allow great flexibility, I think, in dealing with, like, how to deal with it, right? It's not a very prescriptive, I don't believe, policy. So, I mean, I support it as is, and I would definitely echo what Mayor Creasy has said, that this hasn't been identified as an issue. So, really, this change is just reflecting sort of changes in law, is that my understanding? Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if I heard that this was a particular problem, then I would be wanting to make further changes to it, but at this point, I feel like what's here is an adequate system.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Marcusi. I respect that you haven't heard that, and but in fairness, the silent voice doesn't speak up and say that they don't feel comfortable lodging a complaint. So that would be my comment back to that, is that, and I'm not trying to dig up a whole bunch of stuff, because I'm not that kind of person, but I just feel, when I read that policy and I reflected on it, I thought, at the end of the day, if I still felt that I was that unheard person here in the city, I would look at that policy and I still would not be able to have anywhere to go. Because, it's still my supervisor. So I just feel like we still, or it's still that person that I know I can't go to them and lodge a complaint, so this policy would not have rectified anything. So my question to administration, and I realize that nobody's here, but would be, is there things that, like, will this policy unearth things that are actually going on? Like, that's what I just, not that I'm trying to dig something, but I don't feel like I'm heard through this policy if I was in that situation.
So obviously it's difficult to, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think it's difficult to know what every member of the organization thinks, but I would say in action, we have received and processed concerns brought forward by frontline staff that involved senior leaders in this organization in the past. And that was an effective process that did involve a significant power differential to go through. And so I currently, I also have not heard any concerns raised from staff that they are not feeling like there's an avenue for them to make their concerns known. Although I have to acknowledge that I may not be one to hear such complaints.
Very good. Well, I think we've had considerable input on this, but I will ask one more time if either Councillors Connick or Ross have anything additional?
Yeah, Mayor, just maybe just one thought of, obviously there's a process to bring a question or concern forward. I guess my question is there a process that gives peace of mind to the employee that policy or the issue at hand, that there's continued follow-up after, if that makes sense? Because there's always leading up to the action, but is there action followed up after that? And I guess in the process is what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
I think in defense of administration, I can tell you that any such cases of that would be applicable here are taken very seriously, and they are followed up and dealt with accordingly. That's as simple as I can put that, but Chief Gowdy, feel free to continue on.
Yeah, so certainly we have a line here that I think is relevant, that the complainant, so whoever lodges the complaint, will be advised, of course, to the extent possible. Confidentiality will be maintained, and the scope of any investigation will be limited to those directly involved. There is also a follow-up with the complainant themselves to let them know, again, to the extent possible, what the outcome was and what sort of actions have been taken by the employer to ensure that that action or behavior, whatever the subject of the complaint was, is remedied. And then there's a follow-up process where we document additional meetings with both the complainant and the individual who received the complaint against them to make sure that that's moving along in an acceptable manner.
Thank you.
Okay, so once again, the motion is the council approve the respectful workplace policy effective March 2020. And I will call the question at this time. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Connick?
In favor?
Councillor Ross?
In favor?
Thank you, that motion passes, and, I'm sorry, I was in favor, yes, my apologies. You got the vote on that?
Just count that.
Hoekstra? Very good. Thanks, everyone.
Part two?
Sorry, Mayor Christie, was that unanimous or no?
That was not unanimous, there was one opposed. And if you care, it is Councillor Hoekstra. It's on live streams. It's not like it's a secret, so if not, Councillor Hibbs.
I'll move that council rescind the existing positive work environment policy 14121.01, 2014, effective March 23rd, 2020.
And just so we're clear, this is just because we've replaced it with the new policy.
That's correct.
Housekeeping item, more or less, unless someone has opposition of it. Councillors Ross and Connick, anything you'd care to speak with rescinding the existing positive work environment policy?
No, thank you.
No, sir.
Thank you. Anyone in this room? Didn't expect so, but just want to make sure. I will call the question. All of those in favor? Councillor Connick?
In favor?
Councillor Ross?
In favor?
That was unanimous in favor. Thank you. What time are we at, people? So let's move into the information portion. Our CAO, would you care to do your administrative report this time?
Such that it is, yes, I'm happy to. Originally, I had some information on our COVID-19 response, but of course, as that ramped up, we had to move to a more fulsome briefing. And at the time of writing this, we had made some limited public access closures, but of course, those are much more widespread now and include all city facilities other than the Macomb Police Station, which also has some restricted access in place. We have noticed a slowdown in permit applications in planning and development, although one positive silver lining, I suppose, is that both in the planning and development department and some of our facilities, we do have the opportunity to do some of the projects that have been on the back burner for some time, and actually to take advantage of this time to do some early shutdowns and some maintenance work that has been long-standing or long overdue. So staff are keeping busy right now, although we are anticipating, further to our discussion earlier this evening, we are anticipating that some of that work will dry up in the coming weeks. Not expecting, we know about that. Regional matters, we did finish the ICF, we signed that with the county, which is great. I haven't heard if there's any extensions being offered, but I imagine some communities won't be done. And nothing further to report on regional matters or external recognition at this time.
Thank you. And into, we don't normally receive that separately, do we?
No.
Council mailbox, the first item up, 6.2.A, the library statistics. from the library board. Is there anything you'd care to expand upon there, Councillor Gullickson?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I think it's interesting to note that 74,000 people, or 75,000 people walked through the door last year at the library. Certainly is a very busy facility. They're making some upgrades to it right as we speak, so it's hopefully will continue to be very popular. And I think one of the biggest issues is whether they should be charging for their memberships, because they're one of the few that do that. Certainly there is quite a bit of revenue that comes from that, and it is an issue that does affect, I think, their funding from the county. So I don't know how that would be offset, but it's an area that they need to address over the next year or two. Other than that, I think it's fairly straightforward.
Thank you. Any questions or concerns with that report? Councillors
I just had
Connick, go ahead.
Sorry, Mayor, I just had one. The report is good. I just wish we had comparative numbers. So we see for 2019 how many people walked through the door, how many items were checked out. It'd be nice to see what we did in 2018 or 2017.
Yeah, previous years.
You know, on the increase and decrease of that kind of thing. Otherwise, it's a microphone.
Thank you for that input. I think it certainly would mean more to put the numbers in context and reference for some alternate years for sure. Message from the HS President from March 10th. I think that everybody is reasonably well informed with this current COVID situation, so I don't think we need to go through that yet again. And it evolves so fast that once you put it in print, it's pretty much old news. So we move into, I'm sorry, did I miss item 6.2.b, the annual report from the Mary Seymour Public Library? Information graphic? That was included as part of it? Okay, first part of the stats, very good. Item 6.3, there is only one from committee reports from the Lacombe Police Commission minutes from February 20th. Councillor Connick, was there anything that you'd care to expand upon from those minutes?
No, sir, pretty,
Thank you. Councillor Head, do you have a question?
Sure, I just have a question for Councillor Connick. In the minutes it lists, Councillor Connick reported on council business and the chief commented on service response areas of jurisdiction for LPS and the RCMP. Would you care to comment on that? Like on what the chief had commented?
Sure. There have been some discussion, or it had been brought up within council, some questions about whether the Lacombe Police Service is actually called or dealing with things outside of city boundaries, and having discussions, for example, with the racetrack. I think the police chief just confirmed that again, the Lacombe Police Service just operates within the confines of city limits. Now, not to say, they can't issue a speeding ticket on Highway 2, because all police can operate within the entire province, but that's not their mandate. Their mandate is to serve citizens of the city of Lacombe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So, Councillor Connick, you're saying that, did he say they don't respond when they get a call then, ever? Outside of Lacombe?
No, if they get a request for help, for example, there was a couple instances in Blackfall where there was no police available, and there was a couple of serious domestic incidents, and there were no RCMP in Blackfall to respond, and so the call went out to LPS to respond, and they did, and there will always And that's true of any service. So if we get a request, if we request help for a serious matter, from the RCMP, they'll respond and help us out as well. So for serious concerns, yes, the call has come out, and the two instances in Blackwell, the Coal Police Service will respond, but, you know, if a call comes in about a speeding vehicle on Highway 2, you know, chances are we will not respond to that, because that's outside of our jurisdiction. The sheriff, the RCMP can deal with that. You know, our primary focus, of course, not always will be the city of Macomb. To answer your question, yes, if there's a serious incident and the request is needed, we will respond.
So I understood that before, and I understand there's no compensation back to the city of Lacombe. For example, if there was an incident at 3 o'clock in the morning and our service responded to that because there's no RCMP coverage, we would do that at our expense, correct?
I believe so. I have to defer to CAO got in that, but I believe so. But again, it has to be a call of a serious concern,
Right.
not a break and enter or anything like that. It would have to be something of a very serious nature for us to respond to.
Okay. Did he indicate how often this happens by any chance?
It's very rare, to be perfectly upfront. I believe there were 2 instances last year, but it's pretty rare.
Okay, so it's not a large expense or anything like that?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Certainly a fair question, but I
Thank you.
would suggest that if it was a large amount of money, we would certainly hear about it. Or a large commitment, rather.
Well, you understand my concern is that
Totally.
we're subsidizing another community's police service.
Totally.
Yeah.
As I said, if it were, I can guarantee you we would be hearing about it.
Thank you,
Yeah, I
Ruben.
would concur with that. It was happening every month, an incident. We would take measures to make sure we get compensated for that, no question.
Very good. Anything else? So as we get into council reports here, I'm going to go down to the one gold star who submitted a written report on time, Councillor Hoekstra. Please go through your report.
So my first comment, I shouldn't be getting a gold star for this. I would think that, am I doing something that's not expected? And that would be my comment to everybody. I just don't understand why I'm the only one that can email Denise when we were told to. It's just a comment.
And a fair one.
But there's my report. I did have a fair bit of contact with citizens, but I itemized it there, so that's my report.
Thank you. Any questions on that report? Would anybody care to do a verbal report? Councillor Gullickson.
No.
Councillor Jacobson. Councillor Hibbs. Councillor Ross.
No, thank you.
Councillor Connick.
I'm not sure. I had a couple items, but they happened late in the week, so I didn't have something in the pot. That's fine.
Thank you. So that is all of the items that we have under 6.0 for information. We could have a motion. Councillor Jacobson,
We accept the items of information.
thank you very much. All those in favor? We have a majority, so I'm not asking the two electronically.
Oh, that's not very nice.
That's the reaction I was hoping for. Good to see you're still with us. Councillor Connick.
I haven't said the thank you.
Councillor Ross.
In favor?
Thank you. And we also have our March 9th minutes that were available for review. I expect everyone's had an opportunity to go through them. Are there any revisions or omissions? Councillor Hoekstra?
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Thank you. Councillor Kotick, anything on the minutes from March 9th?
No, sir.
Councillor Ross?
No, sir.
Councillor Hoekstra, you saw something there?
I just noticed my name was spelled wrong, but anyhow, that.
Well,
I
let's
should-
get it corrected. Where was this at?
The second last motion of the minutes.
Thank you. We'll see that those are corrected. That is corrected.
Second last?
All those in favor? Councillor Ross?
Yes.
Councillor Kotick?
In favor.
Minutes are accepted as amended, or corrected, rather. Next up is Section 8, Notice of Motion, brought forth by Councillor Hoekstra. And the floor is yours to read your motion, please.
So I move to investigate and gauge the future level of municipal support for the activities of the Lacombe District Rikibetsu Society.
Thank you, Councillor Hoekstra. Chief Cody, anything to comment on there?
Sure, so we, excuse me, we haven't specifically identified any sort of review of the Lacombe District Rikibetsu Society in our strategic objectives, but we would foresee that the review of external boards, committees, agencies would involve review of the Rikibetsu Society, and perhaps having it at the very front of that review might work well with Councillor Hoekstra's motion, but we're open to any direction that council has.
Would you care to comment on that, Councillor Hoekstra?
My understanding is I will comment more next meeting, but
Yep.
this motion does come out of the will of the society members that they are looking for direction from us. And so that's where this is coming from.
Which is fair. From what Chief Gotti outlined though, does that seem like a reasonable course of action at this time?
Absolutely.
Very good.
Absolutely. I don't think we're traveling anytime soon, so.
So I believe that concludes the items that we have up until our in-camera item, is that correct? Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Gullickson
So moved that we move into in-camera.
at 7:44. Oh,
Just as a comment.
Councillor Hoekstra, go ahead.
Can we have a break for a moment before we go in camera?
we certainly could, but we can do that concurrently. Okay. Councillor Ross? Did you have a comment?
In favor? No, no.
We gotta catch him once, right? So, all those in favor? Councillor Kotick?
In favor?
In favor.
Thank you. We heard from both. That's good. That was unanimous. We are now in camera and we will suspend the recording. Thank you.